Hello and welcome to today's webinar on SERDP funding opportunities. My name is Stephanie Lawless and I will be moderating today's session. We will get started in a few moments. While we wait for others to log on, I would like to cover a few logistical items. Today's broadcast will be listen only. We will have a question and answer period at the end of the presentation. You may submit questions by using the chat box on the left-hand portion of the screen. You do not need to wait until the Q&A period to submit your questions. In fact, we encourage you to submit them in advance of that session. The phone lines will remain listen only throughout the presentation, so we will not be taking any questions verbally. We will not be able to answer questions about specific proposal ideas or technologies during this webinar. Please note that both the audio and the presentation of today's session will be archived on our solicitation webpage, in case you would like to refer to them in the future. Today's speakers are Dr. Herb Nelson, the Acting Executive Director of SERDP, and Dr. Andrea Leeson, the Deputy Director of SERDP and Environmental Restoration Program Manager. Before I turn it over to Herb and Andrea, I remind phone participants that this is a listen-only session, and to submit questions, please use the chat box in the lower left-hand corner of the screen. Herb?
Thank you, Stephanie. So I'd like to welcome you all, and on behalf of my colleague Andrea, who's sitting next to me, we're excited about this webinar, and we are ready to go, I think. We're talking about the FY 2018 funding opportunities. I'll give you an overview of the program and some of the logistical details and how the process works, and then I'll hand it over to Andrea, who will give you a little introduction to all of the statements of need that are the subject of the call this year. So on the next slide, we see that we really are one of a pair of environmental technology programs. SERDP, which is the point of the discussion today, the Strategic Environmental Research and Development Program. And then we have our companion program, the Environmental Security Technology Certification Program, whose call comes out right after the first of the year. So today we're talking about SERDP. SERDP is a program that was established by Congress in the early 1990s, and I direct your attention to the second and third bullets underneath that. It's a three-agency program. It's a partnership between DOD, the Department of Energy, DOE, and the Environmental Protection Agency. And the third bullet is DOD speak, but what it really tells you is that we're an applied program with statutory authority to do things from basic research through advanced development. So we have a very wide latitude of technologies and research that we are able to support. So this is where we fit in these also are very DoD specific, so those of you that are used to the flow of research throughout the research process onto implementation in the Department of Defense will recognize this. So as I said before, we expand both basic and applied research through advanced development in SERDP, and then our companion program, ESTCP, takes over for demonstration validation. So we are chartered to do a number of things. On the left-hand side of this slide, we are involved with technologies that will help remediate contamination from past practices. You can see some of the examples there, groundwater, soils, and sediments, the traditional sort of environmental restoration things. The department has a large UXO liability from our test and training ranges, particularly our training ranges in World War II and Korean War. And then, of course, we're always looking at emerging contaminants. So that's the sort of cleaning up the past. And on the right-hand side of the slide is not making the past happen again, ways to get the hazardous materials, cut down the number of waste materials in our manufacturing processes and avoid cleanup in the future. So this is some more examples of the kinds of things we work on, and they all fit into what I just told you before. We have some work on the top left on sustainability of ranges and ability to keep ranges going. In the bottom right, we work on climate change, adaptation strategies. All of these things on this slide flow from what I talked about on the slide before. So we are organized in 4 different program areas, we call them. So up on the top left is weapon systems and platforms. These are the people that do mostly deal with manufacturing processes, coating, paints, paint removal, industrial stream, things like that. On the right top is the environmental restoration program area. That is what the traditional chemical cleanup, what many think of as environmental issues, groundwater, contaminants, sediment contaminants, etc. Then we go down to munitions response, which is the UXO problem that I talked about on the third or fourth slide. And finally, our biggest and broadest area, resource conservation and climate change, which covers technologies all the way from management of our built and natural infrastructure and ecologically and in compliance with all laws such as the Threatened and Endangered Species Act, all the way to climate change adaptation. So we structure our solicitation in two ways. Most of the work is described in the core statements of need, and when Andrea talks to you in a little while, she'll describe those to you. These are the traditional research vehicles that all of you or many of you will be familiar with. They're multiple year awards. We structure that in both a broad agency announcement for private sector presenters or performers, and then there's a federal call for DOD and our other federal agencies. Those are parallel. And then the other method that we have to fund research in SERDP is so-called SERDP Exploratory Development projects, the so-called SEED. These are meant to be small, approximately 1 year, and they are really looking for a high-risk, high-payoff work. We have both a BAA and federal call. Not all program areas have a SEED every year, and in fact this year only the Munitions Response Program area has a SEED. So here is sort of how we work. As you will see over the next 5 or 6 slides, it's a relatively complicated proposal submission and approval process. We receive environmental requirements from the services, mostly from our representatives on the SERDP technical committees, and you can see in the big box in the middle who those people represent. That results in these statements of needs, which Andrea is going to talk to you about in a little while, which are our call for proposals. The solicitation was released last week or the week before last, so that is the solicitation box on the bottom right is where we are. And of course we're talking today to people that would potentially submit proposals. Those proposals go back through the technical committees for help with evaluation, and then of course we move on to funded projects. The whole flow is shown a little bit better on the next slide, and this shows really the sort of the involved nature of it. So this at one time or another was animated, but it doesn't appear to be animated today, so we'll just sort of deal with it. It's okay. So you can see up on the left, we've already talked about that. The SERDP technical committees get involved in helping us with the calls and helping us sort the pre-proposals to those that are relevant or not, and helping us look at the full proposals. And then come the next 2 steps. After full proposals are requested, they go out to peer review, and that's meant to be the scientific merit gate. And then those that pass the scientific merit gate come back to the technical committees where they are ranked for DOD relevance. So I often tell people that it's a little hard to write SERDP proposals because you're really talking to 2 audiences. You're talking to the peers in peer review, and you're talking to DOD managers and installation people for DOD relevance. And since you only have 15 slides, you've got to be careful about how you do that. And then, of course, from those technical committees, we go on to selection. And then the final step is approval of each project by our scientific advisory board. So here are the relevant dates. As I said, obviously many of you are on the phone call today because you know that the solicitation was released at the end of October. So the dates that are of relevance to all of you are January the 5th, which is the first Thursday in January. Pre-proposals are due. And they're due at 2 o'clock Eastern, and we're very firm on that date, so please pay attention to that. Sometime in about a month it takes us to sort the pre-proposals, find those that are relevant and that meet the call, and then full proposals will be requested. They will be due about a month later than that, March the 7th it turns out, and again 2 o'clock Eastern, so watch that date. And then all of that business is on the slide before this starts. That grinds around through the spring and into the early summer, and then notifications will be sent. The seed dates are a little different. Seeds do not go to peer review. One of the ideas of that is that peer review sometimes selects against sort of out-of-the-box innovative ideas, so we don't send seed proposals to the peer review. So in that case, the whole selection process shortens up. The seed proposals are due on March the 7th, and then the notification time is just the same as for the full proposals before. So here is a little guidance to those thinking about proposing from our success statistics, from last year, the FY17 solicitation, you can see that their pre-proposal to selection among all categories is about 1 in 8. And that, of course, is a relatively low number because there's a number of people submit pre-proposals that really are not aligned with the SON as they're presented. All of you won't be surprised. There's a lot of people in this world with hammers looking for anything that looks like a nail, so we get those kind of proposals. But once we invite a full proposal, we think the success statistics are reasonable. Something like 1/3 of full proposals result in an award. The number is smaller in the seed proposals because the budget is limited and we get quite a number of those, but they're still not negligible, coming up toward 20% of seed proposals turn into a selection. So these are the published proposal selection criteria, and I don't think any of them should surprise anyone. The first one, of course, is a sort of a pass-fail gate. Does this address the SON objective? And I already told you on 2 slides ago that the success statistics for pre-proposals are not as high as they might be because a lot of people don't pay attention to this relevance gate. Once it fits into the SERDP statement of need and the correct sort of research, then we go to the real serious ones, which are technical merit, personnel, cost, and it's mostly cost reasonableness, not a dollar value that is an issue. And then small factors are how will this transition to Department of Defense needs and small business participation. So the seed selection criteria are similar. There's obviously a relevance gate. Does it really address this statement of need objective? And then these are smaller efforts and they may not be as well scoped out because they're high risk, high payoff, so it's only technical merit and a small factor of transition potential. So I'd like to close this section by talking about a few of the things that are common among competitive proposals that get funded or that are near misses even if they don't quite make the gate to get funded. And I don't know how to say this first bullet clearly enough. I've already said it at least 6 times, that the proposal clearly addresses the statement of need. You will see as Andrea goes through the statements of need, some of them are very narrowly tailored because there's a very narrow problem that we're attempting to address. Once we get past the relevance or addressing the statement of need thing, then clearly the proposer has to demonstrate a good understanding of the state of the science. We want to be doing forefront work, and we want you to know where that forefront is so you can address it. We also are not into make a matrix of tests and just go fill out the matrix. We really would like to see a hypothesis driving the proposal with some clear questions that you will pose in the beginning of the proposal and then propose some experiments or models or sampling that will answer those questions. And so with that, I will turn it over to my colleague Andrea, who will talk about the statements of need.
Thanks, Herb. Okay, today we have 11 statements of need under SERDP as well as the 1 seed statement of need as Herb mentioned. And I'm going to walk briefly through the statements of need. If you have specific questions about these, it's really best to direct those to the program manager. All of the statements of need have the program manager listed at the bottom, and you can contact them directly if there's something you don't understand technically about the statement of need. You should not be contacting the program manager if you want to just see if your idea is a good one. That's what the pre-proposal is for, but we are certainly here to answer questions if the statement of need is not clear. As Herb mentioned, and I'll mention for the 7th time, the first gate on these proposals is that they are responsive to the statement of need, so I can't emphasize enough that you should read the statement of need carefully and make sure you understand the objectives so that you're answering the objectives of the statement of need. And in many cases in our statements of need, you don't necessarily need to address all of the specific sub-objectives, and that will be stated in the statement of need, but you do have to make sure you're addressing part of it. Also, several of our statements of need very specifically say what is not responsive and what will not be considered. Please take that seriously. And also there are sometimes issues that are asked to be addressed, that must be addressed as part of your statement of need. Again, that also needs to be taken seriously. So first up are the statements of need under environmental restoration. We have 4 statements of need this year, and these first 2 I'll talk about are both dealing with the per- and polyfluoroalkyl substance compounds. So this first one is dealing with AFFF source zones and the fate of the PFAS compounds from that source zone. We really felt we needed a better understanding of these issues, particularly related to the impact of these compounds on groundwater. Now, since 2011, SERDP has funded several projects in this area, mostly dealing with fate and transport, so it's really important that you take a look at what we funded previously so that you understand how your work can build on what we've funded in the past. And if you go to our website, you can search for these compounds and you'll find projects that we have funded under this topic area. The second statement of need in this topic area is dealing with remediation of groundwater that's contaminated with the PFAS compounds, either in situ or ex situ remediation. In 2014, we released a statement of need that only asked for in situ remediation approaches for these compounds, but we have realized that we need to broaden this, and so this statement of need is targeted for both in situ and ex situ. And this is one of the statement of needs where we have very specifically asked you to state which of the PFAS compounds will be included in your analytical testing. And again, as I mentioned, we've funded some work in this area already, so please go to our website so you understand what's already been funded here. And this past summer, we held a strategic workshop to look at what we can do to improve our management long-term of contaminated sediment sites. We had probably about 60 experts in the field from a lot of different backgrounds, industry, academia, and government, to get together and discuss the issue. We published a workshop from this report. We published a report from this workshop. You can find that on the website. And from this report, we crafted 2 statements of need. This first one is dealing with understanding the impacts of stormwater on sediment recontamination and recovery. And as part of this, we're also looking at developing better stormwater control and treatment technologies so as to minimize recontamination issues from the stormwater. Again, we're focused on contaminants of concern at most of these DoD sediment sites, such as PAHs, PCBs, metals, but we're also broadening it to include any emerging contaminants of concern that could be of concern in sediments. And then the second statement of need that came out of the workshop was dealing with development of both monitoring as well as in situ remediation techniques for contaminated sediments. And included here is development of new amendments for treating sediments, as well as developing better delivery techniques of these amendments. In terms of monitoring, basically what we're looking at is development of more cost-effective monitoring, but also looking at using these new methods we have for measuring bioavailability and really trying to see how we can use those as surrogates for the higher trophic level sampling events. And again, this is focusing on those contaminants that are most of concern at DoD sites, such as the PAHs, PCBs, and metals, but we are also broadening this to look at the PFAS compounds and other emerging contaminants of concern. Our next 2 statements of need are under the Resource Conservation and Climate Change program area. This first is seeking to develop improved management methods for our threatened and endangered species so as to meet conservation goals and the DoD mission, given a changing environment. And then the second one is dealing with vulnerability of various habitats to climate change on and around the DoD lands. This is meant to be a more applied statement of need, and proposers must clearly show how their research will improve management on our DoD lands. Our next 4 statements of need are under the Weapons Systems and Platforms program area. And this first statement of need is all about trying to build a knowledge base about the occurrence and behaviors of shipboard oil and water emulsions, including addressing issues such as the formation and stabilization of emulsions, what factors drive the formation and breaking of these emulsions. Ultimately, the whole goal is to better help us understand and control the statements of need that very specifically states that emulsion removal methods, if you're proposing that, is not responsive to the SON. The next SON is about developing large-scale, non-chemical, non-media removal processes for thick elastomeric coatings and treatments, and this includes things like rain erosion materials, sealants, fuel tank coatings. Again, we have specific items we're not looking for, and that includes the ship hull coating removal. And ultimately, the proposed technology should at least be comparable in cost effectiveness to current processes that we use. Statement of need is looking to develop new energetic formulations or engineering approaches in the propulsion and explosion systems, so perchlorate, RDX, and TNT. And very specifically, we're looking for proposals for ammonium perchlorate-free rocket motor systems, as well as for Comp B fragmenting warheads. And then the last statement of need area is looking at developing manufacturing technologies that take advantage of recycled and reclaimed materials at our forward operating bases. Manufacturing processes that minimize these resources required for operation are of particular interest. And then our final the seed statement of need, and I'll turn it over to Herb to discuss this one.
Okay, thank you, Andrea. I appreciate it. This is one of the most broad of our statements of need, as you'll see as you look at it. So we are focused on military munitions at underwater sites, so understand the characteristics of munitions underwater. We'd like to understand their environments and the clutter and background that may apply to sensors. And we're interested in technologies of both wide area and detailed surveys to find and identify these munitions, and especially cost-effective recovery and disposal technologies, which we don't see many good proposals on. We have both a regular statement of need, a core SON, and a seed SON with these same technical requirements, so depending on whether the technology is well-formed or not so well-formed, there's a spot for you in this SON.
Okay, Herb, we have had a number of questions. We will answer. Our first question is, what are typical funding levels and durations for SERDP projects?
We usually say that we don't have a typical funding level or duration for a project. We want people to propose what they need to accomplish the objectives for the project they're proposing. However, having said that, for a core proposal, typically they run roughly about 3 years, although they can run anywhere from 2 to 5 years. Funding levels vary dramatically, but they could be they've been as low as $50K per year up to $300 or $400K per year. I would say the average tends to run about $300K per year.
Thank you, Andrea. For RC SON 18-C1, is the RC program area accepting limited scope proposals in this solicitation?
Yes, it is. And in fact, I'm sorry, we should have maybe mentioned that earlier. In each of the SON text, when you download it, you'll see whether or not limited scopes are accepted. And I think in most of them, normal core or limited scopes, which is a small amount of effort for a short period of time, are accepted.
Could multiple proposals be submitted by the same organization?
They can be. We don't put any limit on number of proposals that can be submitted by one organization.
Since the seed solicitation does not have a pre-proposal component, is it okay to send a preliminary summary of a proposed idea for seed proposal?
So the answer to that, unfortunately, is no. Seeds are set up so that only a proposal is submitted, and then they're judged from that.
Can proposals submitted in previous years but not funded be submitted again this year?
If your proposed idea is still relevant to a topic area that's or a statement of need that's been released, you can definitely submit it again, but we'll go back to what we've been emphasizing previously, that your topic or your proposed effort must be responsive to the current statements of need, and you just need to make sure of that.
If you have an established tool implemented with other agencies but not within DoD, would this be applicable for SERDP?
So there's no one answer to that question. Remember, SERDP is a science and technology program, so it depends on whether there are still science questions to be asked in conjunction with the application of that tool to a DoD site or not. If it's already well-developed technology that might be ready for demonstration and validation, meaning no science questions left, then it would be applicable. Then it would be more appropriate for our companion program, ESTCP.
Are proposals submitted to the federal call for proposals reviewed differently than those submitted to the BAA?
No, all proposals submitted are viewed the same and go through the same process.
Is there any funding advantage given to or preference for proposals from American companies versus companies based abroad?
No, there is no particular advantage to either the nationality of either the company or the demonstrators. We have obviously more U.S.-based PIs because we're a U.S. company, a U.S. program, but we have a number of PIs from both universities and government institutions in other countries, and just a few private people in other countries.
Are there limits in terms of number of proposals that will be funded per statement of need or program area?
No, we have no set limits on any particular statement of need in terms of number of proposals. What it comes down to is how many are of technical quality for funding.
Where can we find a list and description of DoD properties that are relevant for these proposals, especially the ecosystem management and climate change vulnerability SOM?
So that's a relatively specific question that I think would be best addressed to the program manager that's listed at the bottom of the SON. He will be able to put you in touch with members of the technical committee who are in each of the services that will have lists, at least examples given of those sites.
Are there U.S. citizenship requirements for SERDP investigators or co-performers?
We don't have any requirements for U.S. citizenship. We have funded organizations from outside the country in the past.
How fundamental or practical can a proposal be?
So this gets back to one of the first things I said when I introduced SERDP. SERDP is a very fortunate, we understand, a very broad program that is allowed by statute to support from basic research through advanced development. So that's a pretty wide range of technologies to be supported. I think that goes from the fundamental end of this question to the practical end. So all of those fit.
For PFAS, will only the EPA regulated ones be focused, or can proposals be focused on other detected PFAS in groundwater?
Under the two statements of need that are dealing with the PFAS compounds, we will not be dealing with only those compounds that are EPA regulated. Some of the compounds we're just discovering issues associated with them. So as long as the proposers show which ones they intend to look at analytically, that will be acceptable.
Are there BAA awards under the SERDP program? If so, how many awards fall into this category?
There are absolutely BAA awards in all the program areas of SERDP. The second half of that question, though, how many fall into this category, is really a function of the program areas. Some program areas, and environmental restoration is one of those, is very heavily university and business people. Others, Weapon Systems Platform is much more heavily weighted toward government laboratories who are more in touch with the industrial needs of DoD. So I think that answer I'd have to know what program area you're asking about in particular to answer that question. But there are certainly more than half of all SERDP awards are through the BAA.
Is cost sharing a requirement for SERDP projects?
It is not a requirement. Having said that, we often have proposals where there are multiple teams. Cost leveraging is always of interest, but is definitely cost sharing is not a requirement.
Where can I find more information on submitting a seed proposal?
So on our website, there is a link which probably got you here about funding opportunities SERDP, and there is the description of the seed proposal methods and the template for what one needs to include in the seed proposal there.
Is it acceptable if your proposal addresses only a portion of the SON, for example, remediation, but not detection?
We have tried to be very clear in our statements of need if you need to address all specific objectives or only one of them. And so look at the statement of need, read it carefully. The answer should be there. If we made a mistake, which it does happen, and we are not clear, please contact the program manager to ask. There are definitely some of the statements of need that have been released. You can address only one of the specific sub-objectives. Some of the statements of need do require you to address all.
Is the webinar being recorded, and will it be available online? In particular, will it have the full audio?
So this is a yes and no answer, unfortunately. Yes, it is being recorded, and yes, it will be available online. But what's being recorded is exactly what you heard. So we will go back and take a look before we post it, and if there are some spots that are just inaudible or we've missed some information, we can touch that up. So that may add a day or two to the time before it's available online.
I would also add that the slides are available too if you would like to look at those. Is the involvement of small businesses required?
The involvement of small businesses is not required. However, for projects that will require a contract, essentially any non-government organization, you'll need a contract to get funding. You will be required to submit a small business plan, and so in that you'll need to show which small businesses you're using, or you'll need to make it clear as to why you cannot find small businesses to do parts of the project, et cetera. So you will need to submit a small business plan describing how you're handling this aspect.
Is it possible to submit pre-proposals for multiple SONs? If multiple are selected for full proposal, does the proposer have to choose one to continue further?
So it is absolutely possible to submit multiple pre-proposals and multiple pre-proposals against multiple SONs. If a number of them are chosen for a full proposal, you do not have to limit yourself, but keep in mind there's only about a month to prepare the full proposal. And doing a large number poorly in a rush manner is not really a method to get a successful award. It would be far better to limit yourself to that number that you think you can do with high quality.
Can federal agencies partner with private industry to do a joint proposal?
Federal agencies most definitely can partner with private industry. We do get a lot of joint proposals with that kind of mix of teams.
Are proposals for computational work but not laboratory construction acceptable?
I think that depends upon the SON you're talking about. Some of them clearly, as I read them, call for either field work or laboratory work. Others of them, for example, the munitions response one, has a section on analysis of sensor data. So in that case, computational work would be almost the only thing applied. You'll have to look carefully at the proposal, at the SON, and see whether the method you're going to propose fits in.
If partners are required to implement a solution, must such partners be designated at the time of the proposal?
If partners are going to play a significant technical role, it's really best that such partners be designated at the time of the proposal. Later on in the project, it may be possible to pull a partner in, but part of what's being evaluated with the proposals is the project team. So it's very important to have your partners identified.
Limited scope proposals are of high risk and minimal data. Does this mean that core proposals require a lot of data, or can it be a bench scale lab study?
So we maybe didn't word that so carefully. So limited scope proposals are really meant to be a technology for which you're not currently don't have enough data or knowledge to fairly cost a full proposal. So the idea would be in the first year you get your hands around the technology, you'd be able to then cost with some certainty what it would take to finish the project, and then go on into if it's successful, of course, go on into a full core project. So don't focus so much on the data required for a full proposal. Really focus on what the point of the limited scope is.
Are there different funds available for BAA versus federal proposals?
We don't actually have different pots of money set aside for BAA versus federal proposals. We evaluate, each of those are evaluated based on technical quality.
Can multiple PIs from multiple universities collaborate on a single proposal?
Yes, they can. That's not at all unusual that there's a number of PIs, a project team. We, though, have one main PI with whom we do all correspondence and is involved in filling out all of our paperwork and reports and everything. And so all the other people would be referred to as co-PIs in that case.
Is there any means of receiving feedback for rejected free or full proposals?
At the pre-proposal stage, we typically do not provide feedback. We simply don't have the staff available to handle the number of pre-proposals that are submitted. At the full proposal stage, all full proposals go to peer review, and we do provide that feedback once the solicitation is closed.
Can SERDP funding cover salary costs of federal employees?
Yes, it can. Many of our PIs from the federal side are at reimbursable laboratories that work on reimbursable funding, so it's not at all unusual for us to cover federal salaries.
For the stormwater proposal, do you have preferred sites for study?
We do not have any sites that are identified under that statement of need that proposers need to work on. At this stage, you should look at sites that are probably convenient to your location, or if you are familiar with DoD sites, you can propose those, but we have none that are specifically required.
How do I determine who the appropriate program manager is for me to contact about a statement of need?
The appropriate program manager's contact information is listed at the bottom of every SON, so if you will check the SON that you think your technology or research area falls under, you'll find there on the very bottom of the SON list.
Are there advantages to submit a proposal through the BAA or through DoD?
There really is not any advantage to going through one or the other. The lead investigator should be the one that makes the most sense, both technically and administratively, to lead the project. And so if that's a DoD partner, then they should go through the DoD call. If it's someone from private industry, then you should go through the BAA.
Is there a limit on the percentage of time a PI must devote to a proposed project?
Well, the silly answer to that is 100%, of course, is the limit. I know that's not the point of the question. I don't think it is unusual for us we don't have a lot of proposals that are one PI with one graduate student and one postdoc where we pay 1 month of summer salary at the PI. But that's not out of the question. So I think the answer is if you're proposing yourself only for 2 or 3 hours total, then we would question why you're the PI. But there's no reason that the PI has to be the largest contributor to the project at all.
Will a seed proposal need to fall within a statement of need, or can it be applicable to the program area in general?
Well, first we have two different terminologies for this. A seed proposal is one that is submitted to a seed statement of need. And as we discussed earlier, we only have one statement of need for seed proposal this year under munitions response. Now, a limited scope proposal looks very much like a seed in that the projects are for roughly about 1 year and $200K max. However, the limited scope proposals are submitted against the core statement of need. So, for example, under ER, we have two statements of need that are addressing the PFAS compounds. You can submit a limited scope proposal to one of those statement of needs, but you must still address the objectives as they're listed. You can't submit these that are just in general addressing the program area. And since we're talking about limited scopes, I'm going to go on to another question that was posed where it says some SONs include the option of submitting a limited scope proposal, and how is the review of these proposals handled? So the review of the limited scope proposal is the same as the review of any proposal submitted to a core statement of need. So a seed review is handled differently from submitted under the core. So your limited scope proposals are reviewed just like any other proposal submitted to a core statement of need.
If you submit a proposal that has a federal and non-federal partner, does it go to a federal or non-federal call?
So this is really a variant of the answer that Andrea gave about 5 or 6 questions ago. So I think the answer to this is it depends, and what it depends on is who is the major participant, so who is the PI. If most of the work will be done at the non-federal institution, then presumably the non-federal person would be the PI, and it would go to the non-federal call. And the reverse would be, of course, the case if the federal person was the largest contributor.
Okay. This is the last more general question that we have received. There are other questions which are more specific to a statement of need or technology. For those questions, we ask that you contact the program manager for that specific area. Thank you for attending the webinar today. As a reminder, the presentation and audio will be archived for future reference on the SERDP solicitation webpage. This concludes today's webcast. Thank you for listening.